go. So, so the first item on our agenda is a discussion of a possible November 7th ballot question. And Dwight, this was an idea that you raised. You asked if it was a possibility, and I said it is. I think when I was, oops, let me turn this on. I think when I responded, I said that it is definitely a possibility. We could put a question on the November 7th ballot. The only potential drawback to that I see is that it's probably going to be a fairly low turnout election. I think there's, maybe a couple of state referendums, although I guess that Pine State Power will be on the ballot. That might generate some interest, but there's no contested town council elections. There's no contested school board elections, I think. No, maybe there is. And then there's some elections for library trustees, but nothing that's going to generate a swell of people. But I'm interested in y'all's thoughts as to what you think about that. Do I want to advocate for that?
I just broached the issue because I know during our last meeting we had chatted about Survey Monkey or something similar, and I think you're going to find comparable responses, percentage wise. And there was also some discussion: how do you ensure that you just have Winthrop residents? And so the election is one way to minimize someone from outside filling out the survey.
So would you envision then that we would have a ballot question, or would we actually hand out a survey to people and say, hey, while you're here, would you fill this out?
Again, world according to Dwight.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking just one ballot question. Are you in favor or not? And because I think that's what we're trying to flesh out is, do the citizens of Winthrop want to move forward or not with a vote mooring ordinance?
So is that on now?
Yeah, turn it on.
Am I on now? Okay. Can I?
Yeah,
Yes.
we're all looking at it, like this side here.
So I've given this a lot of thought, and I was looking at the survey. I guess my approach is going to be why. What's the why behind it? What is the goal? What is the reasoning? And in thinking about the whole mooring ordinance, I'm just I need some clarification, I guess, as to this really primarily affects property owners as far as the mooring ordinance is going to lakefront property owners.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that.
Okay.
Because and Mike's a good example of this. So Mike is not a property owner on the lake, but he has had a mooring in the, oops, okay, so someone turned their microphone off. Okay, there we go. It's a deal where it only one at a time or creates feedback. But you've got people like Mike who have a mooring or recreate on the lake. They're not property owners. Those are state waters, so that you have a right to recreate on those waters. And so I see it as a little bit of a broader issue than just property owner issue.
I guess my concern around that is initially when this whole issue came up and there was talk about a mooring ordinance, I got a question from one of the Lake Association members who's fairly new in town, and she said, hey, what can I do to help with this mooring ordinance? And I just reached out and said, as far as the Lake Association goes, we're not a part of this. But personally, I think this might be a little more complicated than you think. And it's important that we get to all the facts and understand what the process is and what's really happening. My concern is that people will just vote without really the knowledge or understanding of the issue and just be like, no, I don't like the way it looks. Or, and I guess they, in the survey it does ask that, but as far as an actual vote, I mean, are we bound to a vote?
Oh, no. So this would not be a referendum.
Okay.
It is more of an opportunity just to get people's opinions. So
Okay.
It would be a non-binding referendum is the way that we would frame it. So the only drawback I see, Dwight, is if people say, yes, we want a mooring ordinance, but that still remains a little vague, because does that mean that people want it on all of the lakes, some of the lakes, only at North Cross Point? And so I still think there'd still be questions to be answered after that.
Well, I'm just curious, can you be that myopic and focus on just one lake or one portion of a lake where we have 11 water bodies that may be impacted in the community? I just offered it as a question.
No.
Just-
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the answer is yes, you actually can do that myopic. And it just depends upon sort of what the will of the community is and what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're trying to head off an issue so that it doesn't become a problem on all the lakes, then you might want to consider a mooring ordinance on all the lakes. I mean, the reason, let's be honest with ourselves, the reason that we're here is Norcross Point. That was the genesis of the whole community discussion. And so if we want to address that, then we can do that. And I've had an opportunity to talk with some of you individually, and a question has been raised of, well, could we just regulate the activity at Norcross Point? I posed that question to our attorney, said, yeah, it actually might be a pretty good idea because you're sort of limiting the scope of this as opposed to being this much more unwieldy ordinance. And it's important to keep in mind that even if we pass an ordinance, we don't have jurisdiction on any of the waters that are in other towns. And so, for instance, I had an opportunity to spend some time on Tuesday with the Reedfield town manager. He said initially Reedfield was working with Winthrop on the potential of having a joint ordinance there that matched the ordinance here. And at a certain point, Reedfield no longer felt comfortable with it and just said, we're out.
Like everybody else.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I mean, you could, and I asked, and in fact, I asked the attorney if that should come in the form of a regulation of an ordinance or a policy. And he seemed to think that if we were going to regulate that activity only at Norcross Point, it should still be some sort of an ordinance.
May I?
Absolutely.
The fact that we're specifically targeting the south end of the cove of Maranacook Lake, to me, seems unfair, and I think that the questions on the Survey Monkey are leading people down that path to specifically think about the moorings at the end of Maranacook Lake. The ramifications of this ordinance reach so many different aspects of lakefront owners, lakefront almost owners, people that come in and use the boat landing, just to target, and I'm using the word target because it was a targeted location that brought this whole thing up, but other people were affected, and I don't think the people along Maranacook Lake on the Memorial Drive side knew exactly how that they were going to be affected. A lot of people stood to lose more than they were to gain, and people thought, well, here's these people just freeloading down at the end of Maranacook. We got to do something about this. It looks terrible. Why does it look terrible? It's a cove on a lake in the state of Maine. It's a state-owned body of water, and it falls underneath the state of Maine guidelines, inland fisheries and wildlife. As far as mooring rules, it's already regulated. So if we're gonna regulate just one section of one lake, I don't see how we're gonna be able to do that without a governing body or officer, because I don't believe that that Mark is going to do it, and I don't feel like the Winter Police have anything that they want to have to do with it. So I'm feeling like we're just complaining about some moorings down at the end of Maranacook. Why have an ordinance just for that when it's gonna affect so many other people? Because I guarantee you won't be able to do it without enforcement on all of it. You can't just enforce 14 boats at the end of the lake. I don't see how we can do that.
So one of the ideas, Mike, that I talked with the attorney about, if we were gonna regulate that, is how it would work. And essentially, it would be sort of similar to the boat slips down there where people would be registered their mooring. We would have a certain number of moorings that we would allow. Under state law, at least 10% of those would have to be for people who are not residents of the community. And so for instance, let's just pick a nice round number. Let's say that we had spots down there for 20 moorings.
Well, okay, great.
And so two of them would have to be regulated or reserved for people who are not residents of Winthrop.
So just wondering, would those people be able to be taxpayer fluent residents? Or do they have to be somebody completely unaffiliated with the town of Winthrop?
So as the town manager, I'd be looking to this body to sort of give you some guidance as to how you think that should work. I mean, should there be some preference to someone who is a seasonal resident versus a full-time resident? And the way that the attorney explained it to me is the people who long had a mooring down there, you know, we could establish a system in which they're sort of grandfathered, if you will, that as long as they wanted their mooring year after year and were willing to come in and register, they would have dibs. Sort of like Green Bay Packer season tickets, right? You know, we hear people who have those tickets in their family for generations. And at a certain point, you know, the family may say, we're no longer interested, and then they have a waiting list, and the next person up on the waiting list gets an opportunity to purchase those tickets. Similar sort of concept with this, the way that the attorney explained it is, you could have people who year after year have the dibs on continuing to use their mooring, and at a certain point, let's say the catches decided, you know what, we're selling the boat, we don't need a mooring any longer, we'd have a waiting list, and then the next person would have the opportunity to use that. So it's that sort of regulation that would occur. You are right, Mike, you would have to have, if you have some sort of mooring ordinance, you do have to have a harbor master. That is a responsibility that could be given to the code enforcement officer, assuming that that person underwent the required training from the state.
Understood.
Because you're so engaged with our municipal government, as you know now, we have a town planner, we have an executive assistant, so it's cleared some bandwidth for the code enforcement officer. So I don't feel like that would be an onerous prospect for him.
Okay. So go ahead.
No. Feel complaining. Came with you.
So, yeah, so enforcement would have to come into play, obviously, but that suggestion that you made about limiting the amount of moorings, paying a registration fee, making sure that all the boats down there had insurance, and creating revenue either for the town or for the lake association or however it would be. These suggestions were already brought to the town attorney, so that was one of the suggestions that we made.
Yeah.
And part of this whole frustration is that it carried on beyond where it probably should have. Our thing was, you know, regulate us, limit the amount of moorings, put a waiting list in, and then leave everybody else alone to do whatever they have done. What's gonna happen is if we're gonna regulate us, we're gonna regulate the cove on Annabescook, we're gonna regulate several spots on Coppice, and it's just gonna turn into a mess, I think, so.
And make no mistake, in explaining this, I don't want to be seen as advocating a position, because you know what would make my life easiest? No regulation at all, because I got enough on my plate to deal with. But if this is what the community wants, then it's something that, you know, we can provide. And I think in my mind, Mike, that's the first question is, you know, is this something that the community even thinks is important enough to warrant some sort of regulation?
Right, and if we think back of how did this start in the first place, and then your answer is clearly no, there shouldn't be any regulation, unless there are specific issues that come up on specific lakes, which should be taken care of by state regulations, as I understand it. So that's just my standpoint. Go ahead.
I'll just play devil's advocate. You know, with the scenario you just outlined, if you limit to say 20 boats to that cove, what's to prevent someone from saying, well, I'm gonna move to Annabescook or to Coppice and put a mooring in those lakes? If there's no regulations on all the water bodies, That's the concern, you know, again, I'm very isolated, where I live and just a handful of people on the road, but the concern has been from a property owner, lakefront property owner, what's prevent somebody from showing up and putting a mooring out in front of my property? And so I guess that's a valid question.
Has there ever, I've heard stories about this in the past, have there ever been other mooring issues before this? I mean, so if we regulate that one spot where folks are already gonna be, they're already gonna be next year, I mean, is there any downside to regulating that for you? I mean, for me, it seems like the mooring field concept would be a really good solution in the sense that, you know, the folks who are there are protected, they have their right of way, they have their right to be there. And then the folks who are living there, they also have the protected, you know, there's a requirement to have a protected safe swim zone and those type of things around there. I don't see too much of a negative side if, you know, if that's really how it goes for just the Northwest Point.
Right.
But is there truly any other issues from a mooring perspective that you've ever heard of?
Well, I just became aware of one, and I have not gone to look at this myself. I don't know if it's still an issue, but I was told by somebody that at the East Winthrop Public Beach, I don't even know exactly where that is.
It's right after East Winthrop Post Office.
Right before Wilson's Point.
Yep,
Okay,
take a right.
so I did have someone tell me that they used to swim there and that, I don't know if it was this year or last year, they went down, I think it was last year. And there were a bunch of boats moored in that area to the point where it was prohibiting people to be able to use the beach to swim. So I have not heard that before. And I don't know what the situation is now. I don't know if when the mooring ordinance went into effect, people just took their moorings out or, I don't know if you've heard anything about that. So anyway, that came on my radar, so I thought I would share that. I also talked to, some people that they're live on the coast, but what they said is that they had to pay, there was a limited number of moorings. They had to pay $200 to have the mooring set by somebody, like a company. And then every 2 years, all the moorings were inspected, so they paid that fee. And that's kind of it. So I don't know if initially a place to start, if we were to say, create an area that you could have a certain amount of, certain number of moorings, that we would first have someone like, I'm just gonna throw Web & Son or somebody that does work on the lake, to go and inspect the moorings and determine whether they're what they should be. And if they are, they're great. If not, then that person would need to be paid to have that, you know, a legitimate mooring put in place. So those are just thoughts. I did talk with Wendy Dennis from the Cobbossee Watershed District about if she had, and she was involved apparently with the initial process, but she said, she was never really clear, she said, about like what the problem exactly was. So I went down through with her, and this is what she said. She does think it's important that people go in and out of there slowly, not to stir up too much sediment on the bottom. And I think people go in and out there slowly anyway. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's not very, it's pretty shallow.
Right.
So as far as safety or environmental issues, she really didn't see any unless that, you know, people are flying around in there, which I don't think that's an issue. She did feel like that, you know, there is only a certain amount of moorings that can safely and reasonably fit into an area. So if we were to map out an area, then determine how many moorings there would be. If there are more moorings now than could fit there, her thought was maybe to, as people give up a mooring, just eliminate that mooring until you get down to the number that's the ideal number. And then go with the process that you outlined. I think that's it. I mean, she really, from a water quality perspective, the only thing she was concerned about was the overcrowding. If you get too many boats in there, so. Personally, I feel like the two property owners that are down in their area should have a 200-foot space out in front of their places, so that or close to that, so that.
I don't think Barb has 200 feet to the boat slopes. And she's got two big moorings out in front of that place.
So maybe we look at that, maybe it isn't 200 feet, but it should be an ample amount of space so that those property owners have
No question.
access it and are respectful about, feel respected by others. And I don't think that's an issue either. I'm not saying it is, but I know there is one vote in there that's a little bit close to the next house down, one party barge, but I think those are things that that can be worked out. I guess can we do something like a really simple thing, like people can't put moorings out in front of a property owner's property, if they don't own that shorefront, they can't put a mooring out there within 200 feet. I don't know, because to answer your question, your concern, I don't know what you've got down there for property, but it's not legal for someone to cross somebody else's property to get to a mooring. So they've got to have a way to get to that mooring, right? And if there are boats there, I don't know if there's a public access somewhere where they could paddle out okay. So, I mean, those are concerns. I don't know if that's happening anywhere, but it seems to me unlikely that someone would do that, but I don't know exactly what that setup is, and I don't know what other setups might be like that.
Can I just make a
Yeah,
Robert's
absolutely.
rule of order suggestion?
Mhm.
That we get back to item 004,
Okay.
because item 006 is what I think this would be all captured under.
Yeah, so, but to answer your question, Lynn, yes, someone could go and put a mooring in front of Dwight's place if they wanted to. And the way the attorney explained it to me is that the property owner has the right to place the first mooring within 100 feet of his shoreline, and then after that, then someone else can put another mooring out there as long as it doesn't interfere with their mooring and is no closer than the property owner's mooring. So to Dwight's point, what are the thoughts about putting something on the November 7th ballot? The only other thing that makes me a little itchy about that is I want to make sure that we're like moving forward with this. And so if we don't have results until, if we don't meet again until mid-November without results, then, we've lost another month and a half.
What's the cost to put something on the ballot if we,
It'd be for the amount of the paper that we would use for the printing, so negligible.
Does having a question that says yes or no to a mooring ordinance really answer our questions though? I think if it comes back and it says yes, and then we'll say, well, what does that mean now that everybody, that recommendation is that every lake has a mooring ordinance? Or if it comes back no, it doesn't really solve any problem necessarily either. But if you have, I think the survey itself gives a little bit more information and insight as to diving into what the real problem is. My recommendation or thoughts would be to do the survey rather than the referendum. I don't think either were wrong, but I just need to get more information from the survey.
I agree.
Again, I just offered the
absolutely.
suggestion because we had talked about
Yeah.
something quickly and getting, try to be very specific that we target. So.
Yeah.
If that's, we can segue into item 005 and talk about, so these are in kind of combination. If that- I mean, how best to disseminate. You're the facilitator, Anthony.
You're doing a great job, Dwight. Matt, you had something?
I'm sorry for being late, number one. Two, kind of catching up, but I think I'm up to speed, with regards to, because I knew we were gonna have the discussion on, the ballot question piece. And I do think that there's a component that, I lean towards, having the discussion around the survey a little bit more fulfilled, and that there's a potential that depending on how if we continue to move forward with the survey with some questions, and I have some comments and stuff on that as well, but the ballot question to me gets elevated, I think, if we can get through some of the initial survey understanding of the questions that we're posing. And I've shared some commentary briefly with Anthony on some thoughts I have on the questions itself. And if I may, if we can kind of move into, to your point, Dwight, we kind of move into the discussion around all five. I want to kind of table, I guess, the November ballot question a little bit, if I make a suggestion or recommendation around that and kind of work through the survey questions. Because I think there's some things, at least in my opinion, a little bit that I wanted to bring to this team. Some considerations of kind of focusing in on what the maybe that issue was, and I'm hearing what you're saying, Len, too, with some of what's going on. But let me jump right into a couple of things on the survey question, if I may.
Please.
Okay, so, one of the things that, as I reviewed the survey questions, I still kind of came back, Anthony, to some of the thoughts that I had, so I'll bring it to the team today, right now, is that when I read the draft of the survey questions initially, I know we're getting after trying to understand what the questions are. Two questions I want to bring to this team is, we're talking about a mooring ordinance. And I kind of went down, and maybe I'm down the rabbit hole, but I'm looking at an individual mooring question, which is kind of what the discussion was just happening. Individual property owners, we know there's an ordinance by state regulation that kind of defines what that is, where that can be. The other definition that I was driving a little bit as I reviewed some of this is I'm terming it a mooring field ordinance. And to me, there's a differentiator between the two. So as somebody, you know, there's going to be potentially the individual property owner that's worrying about an individual mooring. And there's gonna be guidance around, you know, understanding that state law is already on the books right now, with regards to public people that want to use public water sources and where they can put a mooring on those restrictions. So that's defined. So then I get back to kind of, as I was reading the draft questions, one of the questions we have is which starting to talk about, is there a problem with a mooring? Do we need a mooring ordinance for Winthrop Lakes? And one of the things I mentioned to Anthony is, are we talking about all Winthrop Lakes? Because that's the question. Or then there's a question that comes back and says, are we talking about Norcross Point? Which is on Maranicook Lake. So that's what drove me to the thought process a little bit around saying, should we be kind of, these questions, I like them, and I still have some discussion around the individual ones as we work through them. But should we be asking, if we are gonna push the survey out, do we need a mooring? So my recommendation was to say, and I think we almost got there, but it's basically to say, on question 6 of the survey. So we say, should Winthrop have an ordinance to control, regulate moorings? And this is where I said, I kind of was suggesting you know, and I want the team's input. Should we have an ordinance to control, regulate individual moorings in all Winthrop Lakes? And then the second question, it's an A-B question, it's the same thing, but it's, should Winthrop have an ordinance to control, regulate mooring fields in all Winthrop Lakes? Because in my opinion, there's a little bit of a difference on those two factors that might still be, supported and or opposed by public in either one of those. So just finalizing my point on this is that thinking about, as we look at the survey questions, because that's why I want to table the ballot question, I think it could be a good avenue for us, but to get back to defining, do we want to take and talk about an individual mooring ordinance question? Because maybe it isn't. Maybe the data that we might come back in is they come back and they say mooring fields. Now, what you brought up today, Lynn, is East Winthrop Beach.
Mm-hmm.
With mooring, and I haven't been down there in a long, long time,
Yeah,
so.
I've never been down there.
Yeah,
All my
you
63
know,
years.
so I'm familiar with it, but I haven't been down there, and I will go down and take a peek. But if there's a bunch of mooring balls that are starting to pop up down there on Cobussy Lake, which is the East Winthrop Beach area, for those that are on the call, to then that's starting, in my opinion, to look like a mooring field. So one of the questions, I hate to be a little bit back on the information you brought, Lynn, but one thing that I would be asking, and maybe we table this, because I think Anthony comes back to kind of your seat a little bit, is I would want to have a good understanding as to who owns and operates and controls that East Winthrop Beach. Is it a community beach down there, or how that, and it might be silent. So I'm not sure if so that's a question that needs to be answered. Is that a town of Winthrop public facility open to all of the town of Winthrop, or just residents of East Winthrop? Would be my question. So I just want to just table that for a minute, and coming back to this that I'm raising. That's why I went to thinking about having a kind of what I'm calling two questions, starting at question 6. Do we need an individual mooring ordinance? Or do we need a mooring field ordinance? I'm not saying that it couldn't be the same ordinance addressing both components. But that's my question, because then that leads to question 7, 8, and 9 becomes an A-B question again. I got one other thought, Mike, real quick, to give the team some thoughts, because the other thought that I had with regards to the existing field mooring, I'm gonna use the term field, mooring field that's in down at Norcross Point right now. One of the thoughts that I also wanted to bring to the table as we consider these questions is that it's Summer Street, is it not, Anthony? That it's Summer Street that runs by Inmore. So the town of Winthrop, my understanding is they own the street, and they own the right of way of the street to the shoreline from the culvert of the railroad culvert back to, I'm just generally speaking here, to Inmont's, I'm still using that as AMI, but AMI's parking lot. So let's just assume for my story here that that's a 100 feet. I think it's in that order, coming from the culvert back to that parking lot. So now you're coming down Summer Street from the railroad tracks. 100 feet, let's just say. And if we were to look at a mooring field that's existing there today, that comes off that town-owned street and property, now we've got a property, an access point that goes runs parallel to the railroad tracks. So you're taking and looking at basically the mooring field that's there today kind of runs parallel to Summer Street as a rectangle, saying it that way. So then you're taking this and you're going like this. So now you're running the however many are there, 15, whatever, let's call it 15 right now. That same footprint that's there could be turned. So now you're not in front of anybody's property. You're well within the two properties that's down at Norcross Point. So you're gonna be well in the state jurisdiction of being not in front of them, or not any disputes as to being within that setback. And then you're gonna be up the railroad tracks with that. And it seems to me that would be something that's existing today. There's plenty of mooring balls that run up and down the railroad tracks. And then that would be controlled by the property that is on Summer Street that the town owns. And now you have two property owners, one being the town, one being the railroad tracks, that has not exercised any right to eradicate the mooring balls that are existing up and down the west side of Marana Lake. As an example, I'm using this as an example of this for Norcross Point, but that's what's driving back to my question on a little bit, if we're running the survey, do we want to talk about a mooring field? Because if we do the mooring field, and if the questions come back and it's isolated to, people say, and we need to understand, but I'm just saying, theory is saying, okay, the problem is Marina, and it's that piece, then we might be able to maybe look at that. I would like to research the East Windsor Beach area that you're talking about.
And
And I'd also like to kind of have a little bit of, if we go down that, I'd also like to understand a little bit of the only other area that I feel has what might be defined as a mooring field is the marina on on Copacy Lake as well. So that's at please help me with.
Lakeside Marina.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's my thoughts. I just kind of wanted to bring that up to the table.
So all that's good stuff, Matt, but we may be getting a little ahead of ourselves here by talking with that sort of specificity, because the question before us now is, how do we best gather the community's opinion? And I'm not quibbling at all with having another question that said, should we have an ordinance that regulates more fields? Because I think that might provide some extra clarity. So, but I really want to focus on the survey, and if we want to do a survey, and what are the questions that we need in order to gather whatever input that we need from the public. Well, and understanding it's going to be pretty broad at this point. And if the results come back and say, yes, we want some sort of a mooring ordinance, that's when I think we start to hone in on exactly what that means.
so one question about the first two questions.
Yep.
Are you a full-time resident of Winthrop? Are you a lakefront property owner in Winthrop? So rather than yes, no questions, could we do like, please check the following, you're a full-time resident of Winthrop, you're a seasonal resident of Winthrop, you're.
So one of the things about surveys is you never want to present too much information.
Okay.
And so because if you do that, then people are inevitably not going to fully answer the question. So one of the techniques that you use is you try to ask only one question. And I couldn't think of a better way to do that on number 3. And there's a reason also, Lynn, that for instance, the first one is, are you a full-time resident of Winthrop? And then it was because, and y'all please correct me if I'm wrong about this, my understanding was you were interested in what the opinions were of the town residents. Is that an accurate?
That's what I recall.
So with the survey, what if someone says no? And then completes the survey?
They don't. So that's where the technology sort of comes in. You can have this survey set up so that if someone answers no on that, the survey ends for them and they get a screen that says, thank you very much. This
Then can they read?
well, they would have to go to another device in order to
So
do
the
it.
IP address is correct?
Yeah, they would have to do it from another device at that point.
So, if you are not a full-time resident of Winthrop, you say no, but you do own lakefront property in Winthrop.
So if we're interested only in full-time residents' opinions, then that person,
So are we?
No, it should be taxpayers,
I
right?
think it should be that.
I do too.
okay.
Well, residents or taxpayers.
Yeah, because then is someone who pays rent, are they a taxpayer?
Oh,
You see what I'm saying? And so maybe you're right, maybe that's,
property taxpayer.
yeah, right. So maybe that's the way that you couch it, Lynn, is, are you a resident and or
Taxpayer.
property taxpayer?
I think that's better.
Right.
Yeah.
Before we go too far along, how do we plan to disseminate this? We can work on the questions, but how best to get this out to our target audience?
So obviously we would post a link on the town's website, but in addition to that, we would use our social media to disseminate it. And so one of the things for those of you who are Facebook users, you may know the concept of boosting a post. And so think of this will be a good analogy for you, Dwight. Think of Facebook as a water main. And if you decide to pay Facebook in order to get your post in front of more people, the size of the water main grows. So there's more of a flow of users who have access to your post at that point. So we could spend a little money, and it doesn't cost much at all. We could spend a little money in order to make sure we maximize that. I feel certain we could get this in the advertiser for several weeks running. And then we talk it up to our family, friends and neighbors. And, we'll talk about during town council meetings, and we'll just do our dead level best just to get the word out.
So shall we review the questions?
Mhm.
Did you take?
Here. With Anthony's guidance of getting us back on track of reviewing the survey questions, let's dive into it, Dwight.
So I think we have our first question in. Are you a full-time resident and or taxpayer of Winthrop? Do you folks think it's germane to as to whether or not ask a question whether or not someone owns lakefront property?
I do not.
Matt, you said you do?
I guess I don't wanna, I should say I do, I just kinda wanna know what we're trying to gather out of. To your question on two, I have the same question for three. What are we looking for data points out of those two questions? I like question number one, but on question two, to your question, that's why I lean towards, I'm not quite understanding what we're looking for. If you own lakefront property, what's that giving us if they say yes or no?
I was of the same opinion, that those two questions were,
Yeah.
assumed to be,
Yeah, okay. And I'm not married to him, but what I was thinking was there also seemed to be a sentiment among the group when we talked last about, we want to make sure that we're being respectful of lakefront property owners in whatever we do. So that's the only reason that was included, and maybe it's not germane. Like I said, I'm not married to it, so I don't mind asking it at all. And one of the good things about this survey is that according to the Survey Monkey, it would take less than 2 minutes to finish, which is great. The shorter the survey, the more response you're gonna get.
Dwight, I'd be interested in knowing your reasoning by why you think it shouldn't be on, why you shouldn't.
well, we're already asking, are you a full-time resident of Winthrop and a property taxpayer? And then it seems we're lessening that question above by saying,
So-
well, we only really want to focus on lakefront owners. That's the way
I kind of feel like lakefront owners have a bigger stake in this. Like as far as regulations that may go into effect that regulate how they use their shorefront. I'm not sure, and like the average person in Winthrop who recreates on the lake and why that would be important for them to have or not have a mooring ordinance. It seems like it's more, to me, it feels like it is more specific to lakefront property owners, but.
I don't think give precedence to somebody with lakefront property, but I do think it's important to know if they do own lakefront property, because you're right, it does impact many, but so as long as that question is not an elimination round of people, then I think it's more of an information piece for us saying, we conducted a survey, we've done our due diligence, of which, we received 100 lakefront property owners who, have this issue with it, and you can use that more as a data point than an eliminator.
Yeah, it would not be an eliminator question, and to your point, Matthew, I mean, that's sort of what I envision. Let's say 75% of people who take this survey say that, yes, we need a mooring ordinance of some sort. And let's say that of the people who respond to the survey, let's say 75% of them are property owners. I think that just gives you a little bit of insight to who's answering the survey and what their feelings are.
Is that okay with everybody? Does that make sense, or?
I'm not going to follow the sword over that question.
You're not gonna want to, so you still would prefer not to see?
No,
that?
no, I have no opinion one way or the other.
Okay,
Yeah, and that was good, Matt, it's a data point type thing, and I can see that, and again, I'm a Dwight, that with that, I was mainly the reasoning around it, because again, coming back to your point just briefly, is I think we address further in, as we get through the rest of the questions, people like individual moorings versus a mooring field. That's.
Yeah,
we'll get
that's
to that.
good.
And so Matthew, to answer your question about number three, again, it's just trying to include all the stakeholders of the lakes, because this is not just about boat owners or boaters. You know, there are other people who use the lakes, and so they may feel that they're impacted by this in some form or fashion. So it's simply an effort just to try to be as inclusive as possible, I guess.
I'm curious as how none of the above comes in.
Well, maybe you don't use the lakes,
It's a great point.
so. But, you know, not everyone does use the lake, so I wanted to give it an option for those people who do not.
So number 2 would remain as is,
I think so.
and number 3 as well.
I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I'm there.
All right.
So,
Thoughts on question 4?
I'm not sure.
And so here's something I struggle with is kind of the sequence of the questions as well. So maybe this is a worthy question, but maybe it's not in the proper place in the survey. So I'd be interested.
I'm just not sure that. I'm wondering if we're adding in specifics. That we're maybe leading people somewhere.
Number 4 should be, I think number 4 should be eliminated, honestly. I think it's just, again, it leads to targeting and planting a seed of thought in somebody's head, like going on what they've heard about this situation and just forming an opinion without any back knowledge of why are we even complaining about the boats at Marina Cook Lake off Norcross Point. So I would like to see number 4 eliminated, and I would also like to see number 6 moved right on up to number 3. To address the fact of the question, should we have an ordinance to control moorings in the town of Winthrop right off the bat? I mean, most people would already have formed an opinion if they're taking a survey. I think that question should be near the top of the survey.
I think those are very good points. You know, in words of Thoreau, simplify. And I think that's what we're trying to do is, and to Matt's point, you know, a mooring field versus a single mooring. Then you've got to have an explanation somewhere as to what a field is versus mooring. But more globally, we're just trying to find out, as in our charge, does Winthrop want a mooring ordinance?
So what if we use maybe we do need to use the word ordinance, but what if we phrase it as, do you think Winthrop should regulate moorings?
Well, that's what that question is.
Well, an ordinance though,
Well, I think our attorney said it should be in an ordinance.
in ordinance, okay.
Yeah, I think he thinks that would be perfect. But I'm sensitive to what Lynn is saying, you know, when in my world, you may take for granted that everyone knows what an ordinance is, and what we're essentially talking about are regulations, you know? And so maybe the wording of the question should be, should the town of Winthrop regulate moorings?
Like regulate / control moorings or whatever.
I'll just add to that discussion a little bit that, you know, remind yourselves that, there was a process prior to our process.
A what?
That there was a process of discussion publicly with the town councilors. They created a document called an ordinance. So I don't really feel that you need to eliminate that. I think that it is, call it regulate and leave the word ordinance out or in. I just think, again, we're following on a process that was started, and we're continuing that process as an ad hoc committee to understand a process that was before us.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, Matt, but I also never assume that someone's been plugged into this, the whole time. There may be people, when this survey comes out on Facebook, are hearing about this issue for the very first time.
And I'm quite clear that if they want to educate themselves for it, they can go to that town website and find all the data that they need, if they were absent of any prior process, Anthony, but I do agree.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you're a cockeyed optimist.
Could we take 4 and 5 and make one question to say, are you concerned about boats mooring on any of Winthrop's, well, just delete, I guess, 4. Are you concerned about boats mooring on any of Winthrop's lakes?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what Mike says, and so I'm not opposed to that, and especially I think because in question 8, then we ask you if you do think that Winthrop should, and let's say, instead of saying having a mooring ordinance, if you do think the town of Winthrop should regulate moorings, where do you think that should occur? And then people have got a choice either on Norcross Point, which has been sort of obviously the genesis of all this and the focus of it, on all of the lakes or on some of the lakes, so I think that could provide some clarity as to if people think it should be only in one place or on all the lakes.
For number 7, it says if you answered that Winthrop has should. So. Ordinance regulate. I guess, can we ask the question right underneath? Like, if they answer yes, they are concerned about moorings, can you say right below that? If you answered X, please briefly explain your reasoning right there under it, because it gets a little confusing to me. Going like from 8.5 to 7 and.
Yeah,
What do you mean?
so let me make sure I'm following you guys correctly. So what you're saying is what is currently right now, question number 6 should be question number 3. And the wording of that should be, should the town of Winthrop regulate moorings? And to Matt's point, we want to say individual moorings, and then have a question say, should the town of Winthrop maybe create and regulate a mooring field, or should it regulate mooring fields?
I think that, Matt, your point is spot on as far as there are really 2 issues here: individual moorings and mooring fields. I mean, those are the 2 issues that I think, right? Like, I can't see anything.
The potential issues, I guess, that's what we're trying to understand.
So I do think it would be good in some way to identify that, do people have an issue with, a concern about the individual moorings or a concern about mooring fields? It would be good to know if you have 75 people respond and they all check off mooring fields. Or, again, it's just know more about where we should focus but I understand your concern, I do.
Well, I just found, if you look at existing ordinances or regulations that control boat moorings, they discuss both of those situations. So it's one ordinance that addresses
Both.
and it addresses a variety of things, which I think is, once we get into the weeds, as Matt and you has indicated earlier, the devil's in the details. And so you're gonna find regulating moorings include even the type of moorings, the materials that are used, so forth and so on. How far do we get into the weeds on this stuff? So I think you're gonna find that one ordinance is gonna address a variety of topics.
Yeah, and I guess, Dwight, because, and maybe I'm just too hung up on this, right? That if we are gonna create a mooring field in a certain place, and we're gonna regulate that, then I like to sort of know that off at the jump, so that we can focus on that as opposed to something that's a little bit more overarching.
Correct me if I misunderstood, but last meeting we talked about the legal opinion from the town attorney, and it sounded, or I understood that we don't even know if a mooring ordinance would hold up if somebody challenged it. Is that like?
What the attorney said was that he has doubts as to if we said that you may not place a mooring in front of Lynn Roberts' house, that probably wouldn't fly. That under the law, you could place the first mooring there within
Okay.
100 feet, and then someone else could place it another mooring, within 150 feet. So when I was part of crafting Belgrade's mooring ordinance, that was one of the things, is that if you were placing a stone in front of someone's property, you had to seek that property owner's permission. And the attorney now is saying, the way that the state's sort of regulating this now, he doesn't think that that would apply today.
Okay. So basically, even with an ordinance, you, as a property owner, lakefront property owner, we cannot prevent somebody from putting a mooring out 100 feet out, like beyond the 100 feet mark. We can't, no matter what we do, we can't prevent that.
That is the attorney's opinion on this
Okay.
one.
And then, so without an ordinance, can they come in to the 100-foot?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm kind of wondering, Dwight, if the individual thing could be solved by saying, in an ordinance, no one will place a mooring within 100 feet of shore without the property owner's permission.
I think if we did that, we would want to cite state law. That way it
Okay,
gets
right,
us legal
right.
standing.
So, because if we can't prevent the other from happening anyway, there's no point in having an ordinance about it. And I think we need to be careful not to create more hassles, create more problems for the town than we're solving. I guess that's a thought.
Well, it's my understanding that the ordinances were put together to control both the individual, to minimize how many moorings we put in so many feet of frontage. You know, it's like Raymond or Casco, I think they have 100 feet of frontage, one mooring for 100 feet of frontage.
Why would we need to do that?
And then the state law is 200 feet, right, for one mooring. I think that was in the 2014 court decision in Cumberland County.
Yeah, you're testing my memory. The attorney spoke to that at one point in one of the emails that he sent to me, but I can't recall what the figure is.
Is there a problem with that? I mean, because I'm looking around the whole, on just Maranago Lake. I see no issues with,
Yeah, so really and truly, Lynn, that's more of an effort to ensure that moorings don't sort of mushroom out of control. I don't know that there's an issue right now. It's more preventative in nature.
Has there been an issue? That there's not been an issue,
Yeah.
to my knowledge.
Not final, not
We just found out about East Winthrop though, you know, so where else?
that's a field, that's not an
I know,
individual.
but I know over in Anabescook, there's also some continued growth as well.
I mean, logically, for me, you can only put so many moorings in front of a place, or they're gonna start, your boats are gonna smash into each other, like, so. It just doesn't seem like it, in my thought process, that it needs to be regulated, that needs to be regulated. And, you know, you talk about a mooring, but you could have a party barge, you could have a sea-doo, you could have a swim float, that's 3 moorings. If you have 100 feet of frontage, why wouldn't you be able to have all those in front of your property? And if you're regulating that, then you're now limiting property owners' abilities to use their lakefront the way that they want, is my concern.
And that was what the court case was.
And in point of reference, the winter mooring ordinance was written at 50 feet of frontage, one mooring for 50 feet of frontage.
Can I just make a recommendation that was previously raised to come back to the survey a little bit? I think coming into the specificity that you were talking about earlier in the meeting, that we're having some discussions here that, you know, are theory and some things. I think part of the survey's goal is to understand what the problems are.
Right, but I also think that all these questions are important in designing the questions of the survey.
I believe you're absolutely right. That's why I started this meeting a little bit, kind of discussing a little bit on, do we want to have some questions on individual moorings and field moorings, but I recognize the recommendation on the specificity. I really do. And that's why driving back to these questions a little bit, we're getting there, Lynn, a little, but one of the things, like the example that you gave with regards to, you know, talking a little bit about an ordinance that might be created for an individual property owner. We're not sure if that's an issue right now. So kind of my theory a little bit as I work with this team and on this board is I don't wanna create an ordinance based on something that, you know, unless we see some specificity around, we've got an issue, that's all.
Yeah, so to get to Matthew's point, so we know question number 3, we want to ask a question that essentially says, do you think we need a more? To Matthew's point. do you-
Or should winter control / regulate more?
And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so to Matthew's point, do we want to have a question that addresses individual moorings and then a separate question that does the same thing with mooring fields?
How about a question, a follow-up question to question number 3, should Winthrop have should Winthrop regulate moorings, individual moorings or a mooring field? And if yes, how does it affect you directly? I would like to know, like the people that are taking the survey, how does the mooring ordinance affect them directly? Because I think that would weed out some of the, you know, I'm not a lakefront owner, I don't have a boat,
I don't like the way it looks.
I just don't like the way it looks. That's gotta be weeded out of there, and I think if we find out how a mooring ordinance would affect a person's personal situation, it may help us understand what's driving the yes or no question.
So one thing about that, Mike, I don't think that you can include individual moorings and mooring fields in the same question, because one may feel one way about one thing and then another way about another thing. So that's, again, when you're asking survey questions, you need to ask like one question at a time. And so if we want opinions on both those things, we need 2 separate questions.
I meant specifically toward an ordinance itself.
Yeah.
How does an ordinance affect your situation?
Oh, no. I see what you're saying about the follow-up question. Although I will tell you, so you put that little text box there, and probably most people are not going to fill that part out. They're just going to skip to the next.
Well, I think
question.
it's asked in question 7.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay, so, but back to the question. Do we want 2 questions? One to ask about regulating individual moorings and one to ask about
So it would be,
regulating mooring fields?
I think so, but the individual, just to clarify, would that be
That'd be,
the property?
yes, that'd be like the moorings in front of your camp.
But then would that also, because we can't regulate anything beyond the 100 feet, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, are we saying individual moorings, lakefront property owner individual moorings, or just individual moorings? Just randomly out there.
Lynn, my intent, Lynn, as I brought that up, was to come back, it's individual property owner.
Okay.
moorings, Okay, so
Okay,
one of the questions I would like to understand from that question, so to answer your question, it's individual property owners, it's the
Sure.
ones within the 100 feet.
shorefront property.
It's the shorefront property owners. Do we need to specify lengths, widths, depths?
Yeah.
You can only have 6 in your 200-foot frontage, or you've got a 50-foot frontage, and you could still have 6. Getting into the weeds on that. So the first question is, do we even need to be looking at an ordinance that addresses individual property owner,
Shorefront property.
shorefront property owners at all? Because if people come back and say no,
Right,
that's a good point, data point for me. Which then that's why I want the second question to also lead us in where we're gonna go in discussion, if we go in discussion. Is the second question is, if that person says no, and then they move to the second question that says, should Winthrop have an ordinance to control, regulate mooring fields? And they come back and answer that no. And we get 75% respondents that are saying no to both those questions. Our discussion might be fairly short going forward.
Yeah, and conversely, it could focus us into one of those areas.
Correct.
what do you think? We all think.
It's just a thought, guys. I wanted to bring it to the table for discussion.
Right, that's valid. I keep coming back to enforcement, and if you're gonna be checking moorings and tackle on a specific group of moorings in a mooring field, what is to prevent a boat on an individual mooring from breaking free from that mooring and causing property damage somewhere, any more so than a mooring in a mooring field. I think we're back to enforcement for that. That's all.
I think you make a good point, Mike. It kind of gets into the next discussion. If we were to go into a mooring field, I guess, but to not make judgment as to how I would, I'm not necessarily. If I was to look at a mooring field type regulation or ordinance for draft, it's really around the number. Is my focus. Yes, and being in compliance with, environmental laws and, please don't put your oil tank down there as your mooring anchor and that type of stuff, but it's really would be focused around the volume in a certain mooring area and how that might be impacting the public users, boaters, swimmers, those types of things. But just for a little bit of clarity as to where I would think that discussion would start to drive.
So if we did number 3, should Winthrop control / regulate individual shorefront property owners moorings? Blah, 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 blah. It's kind of mumble.
Yeah, I'm not a wordsmith,
But that's the gist. And then the number 4 would be, should Winthrop control / regulate multiple moorings in mooring fields or,
Yeah, I would just say regulate mooring fields.
okay.
Regulate or create, I mean, isn't technically, wouldn't you be creating a mooring field? And then that solves the
Well,
problem.
I guess in the case of Norcross, you'd be, endorsing, ratifying, recognizing.
That's why I think I'd keep it to just mooring fields, so we get that data point, yes, no.
I can,
Can I add anything?
Mr. Fitzgerald, we're having a conversation with the committee right now, and before the meeting is over with, I promise we'll give you a chance to speak.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got our first 4 questions. So, as Mike advocated for getting rid of what was previously question number 4, is that amenable to the group?
it is, I mean, that's,
Okay,
Yes.
right. So then, 5.
is 5 kind of,
Yes, so I'm not so sure 5 is germane anymore, especially since we have
yeah,
question 8.
I think,
Great.
yes, I agree.
I agree.
Okay. So it looks like then the new question 5 would be, if you answer that Winthrop should,
Regulate,
and what I'm gonna say is, should regulate individual shorefront property owners moorings or mooring fields. Briefly explain your reason.
okay.
Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me write that down for you. Okay, so what do you folks think about what is originally question number 8?
I think Norcross Point should come out.
You do?
I think people should state it. If that's a concern, they should be able to state the reason why. I mean, again, I feel like it's just leading people there. I mean, I don't know.
It's just pointing the finger right at the moorings. And technically, I just say it's also, and I don't mean to be defensive, we've been down a long road with this. Norcross Point, technically, we're in beyond Norcross Point. We're not in any way blocking the activities at Norcross Point with the boat ramp or with the boat slips. I just want to make that clear.
Could that just be an open question? The only reason I feel this way is that are there other areas, I mean, it does say all, or other areas we haven't identified? And if we're just targeting Norcross Point, should we say,
So that's question 9. You answered some of the lakes, on which lakes should moorings be regulated?
yeah, but where on the lakes? It's like, where are we?
Well, that's what we're giving people the opportunity to say.
But
you know.
see, I just see which lakes. I don't see the specific places on the lake.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. I respect your opinion, Mike. But if the results come back that people think that there should be a mooring field, that we should regulate a mooring field,
Mhm.
do we have enough information at that point to say that's where that regulation should occur? I mean, I think you could make an assumption that would be the case, but at that point, that's sort of what you're doing, is you're making an assumption.
Which comes back to my question of how does it affect you directly? If you have no skin in that game whatsoever, other than I don't like how it looks, it's not a valid point.
Or only property front owners should have the privilege of mooring a boat on the lake. That's another reason I heard. So I don't know, is there another way to think about this to get to what we're seeking for information without pinpointing, already putting it out there? I mean, I don't know.
You could always if you remove the Norcross Point bullet on 8 and 9, you can simply say, if we answered it some of the lakes in the prior question. I guess you could just finish that whole question, which is saying be as specific as possible or be specific to region. Cause I tend to see both sides here. I don't want to point people just to Norcross Point just because it's there. But on the other hand, it's kind of the elephant in the room. I think unfortunately, it'll be assumed that's what they're talking about, and I would agree with that. So if you could sort of wordsmith that, I don't know how to do that other than try to be as specific as possible in your response. That may help. You may get different answers there.
What if you did all the lakes, say just for now, Norcross is gone, all the lakes, some of the lakes, and then if you answered yes to number 8, or in the prior question, are there a specific location? I mean, because like East Winter Beach, somebody might bring that, so there might be another thing like that somewhere that we don't know about, that somebody might bring up.
Well, I think that's what Matthew was
Right.
getting at. I think that language accomplishes that. So back to Mike's question then, should we have a question that says how, and maybe this replaces what was originally question number 3. How are you personally impacted? Maybe just by saying the mooring issue,
Mm-hmm,
Mike?
That's fair.
mm-hmm. Yep,
That's a tough yes, no question.
but you could say,
Oh, no, you put a text box there and let people.
Just circling back around your earlier comment.
I know, Dwight, don't use my reasoning against it. How dare you.
I mean, I can see saying, I pay taxes, like shorefront property taxes, I don't feel like that should be regulated for me in front of my property, or it could be a reason why you don't want a mooring field, I don't know, or concerns about that, but.
Okay, I got a possible suggestion for how we could, keep question 8 like it is. I'm in agreement that striking Norcross is out. So if you answered that Winthrop should have a mooring ordinance, where do you think moorings should be regulated? You've got an option of all lakes, some lakes, portions of some lakes,
Or certain areas of some lakes.
However you want to wordsmith that.
Right.
Yeah, I just don't know that provides us any additional information. I mean, that we wouldn't get from the next question.
Well, yeah, I see your point, Dwight, Anthony, that
Don't confuse me.
Yeah, yes,
How dare you.
I know, I apologize. So in question 9, answering, so in other words, some of the lakes. So I think that if you're gonna push it into question 9, your question 9 is specific to some of
Which
the
lakes?
lakes.
Okay, yeah.
So if you answered some of the lakes in the prior question, of which lakes should moorings be regulated, we're trying to understand which lakes. We're also trying to understand, I guess, based on this, which portions of those some lakes.
Right.
Or are they all lakes? Yeah.
Well, and I think, again, to Matthew's point, just be as specific as possible. So I'm gonna trust that if someone feels really strongly that they should be regulated on North Cross Point.
They're gonna say it.
That they'll say it, yeah. So back to the question about how does the mooring issue personally impact you? Where in the survey should that be?
Which question is that?
Is the one that we just created.
All right.
So to Mike's point, he asked, and when we provided text box, how are you personally impacted by the mooring issue?
What's happening to number 3? Is that just going away?
I guess that's just going away.
Okay.
The hell with those fishermen both in.
All right, so Oakland resident, lakefront property owner,
Looking for bodies.
should you, what the hell are you like? If you, and so number 4 is if you answered yes to either individual or moorings, then you,
So let me just go through this real quick.
Okay.
So number 1 is, are you a full-time resident or property taxpayer? Number 2 is, do you own lakefront property? Number 3 is, should the town of Winthrop regulate individual shorefront property owners' moorings?
mhm,
Number 4 is, should the town of Winthrop regulate mooring fields? Number 5 is, if you answer that the town of Winthrop should regulate individual shorefront property owners' moorings or mooring fields, briefly explain your reasoning. And then number 6 would be, if you answer that Winthrop should regulate moorings, where do you think that should occur? And then lastly, if you answered some of the lakes in the prior question, please be as specific as possible as to the locations.
okay, yeah,
That's the last question, question 7.
Just to clarify on question 6, was there a text box going on that? Or bullets?
Bullets, all of the lakes or some of the lakes. So if you answer that Winthrop should have a mooring ordinance, where do you think that should occur? And the choices are either all of the lakes or some of the lakes. And then if they answer some of the lakes, then we ask them to be as specific as possible.
We need a motion?
wait a minute,
I don't, but again, the other question is, if we want to ask people how they're personally impacted, where in the survey should that be?
I think it seems like either number, is a question, can't remember, question 5, might already answer that question of if you think we need an ordinance, why, essentially, you think what's the reasoning?
Oh,
That kind of
yeah.
answer.
You think that does that, Mike? Okay, fair enough,
Yeah, good point. I think it does.
okay,
fair enough.
now, so. So number 6, if you answer that, Winthrop should have a control / regulate, where do you think they should be regulated? And all the lakes or some of the lakes, right?
Right,
And if you answered in the prior, if you answered, so number 7, can you go over that again with me? I'm sorry.
sure. So if in the prior question you answered some of the lakes,
Okay,
where should that regulation occur? Be as specific as possible as to the location.
and reasoning. I mean, because what if they just say,
Well, we had the reasoning earlier with question 5. If you answer
Okay.
that town of Winthrop
Okay.
should regulate,
okay,
explain your reason.
okay,
And to answer your question, Dwight, I don't know that we need a motion, so what I would plan on doing is redoing this, sending it to you tomorrow.
Mhm.
Hopefully y'all will bless it, and then we'll go about the business of getting it out in front of the public.
Well, I guess that's a general question. This is not a formal Robert's Rule of Order. We don't need motions. Or
At some point, I think that would be appropriate.
when we feel appropriate.
Yeah. Before we let Mr. Fitzgerald speak. So I briefly explained some next steps there. I would think we would probably want the survey out for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I think that's an adequate amount of time. So assuming that's the case, then do we want to try to meet again on the third Thursday of October,
Mhm.
which is which would be October the 19th. Sound good?
So
Same
the,
time, same channel.
Yeah, 5:30. Try to make it on time.
I will absolutely try to be on time, you know.
one other thing that we
Nothing
didn't discuss that I had on my list was right of ways, shared right of ways, and I don't know that that needs to be discussed tonight, but maybe for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think if the results come back and they say, you know, we need it on all of the lakes, and I think that specifically becomes an issue at that point.
You may hear some of that in the feedback.
Yeah, true. Okay. Do you vote?
Consensus is going with the survey, not the ballot question, just
Right.
loose ends,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah,
And then item 6, we covered all that as well.
I think so. Is there, and I want to give Mr. Fitzgerald a chance to speak here. He's been very patient, but do you guys have anything else that you want to talk about this evening? All right, Mr. Fitzgerald, are you still there?
I am, thank you. Good evening. I missed the meeting last time because I was dealing with a death in the family, so apologize for that. But I wanted to provide a couple answers to the extent I can. Lynn was asking about who owns East Winthrop Beach in that area, and the town does now. I'm an officer of the East Winthrop Improvement Association, and we actually donated 400 feet of frontage 2 years ago. And some of it went to abutting property owners, but a large chunk of it went to the town. That's important because as part of our process and our mission is to improve quality for the residents of Winthrop and East Winthrop. We worked to more formally establish the swim area in the East Winthrop Beach area. And a year and a half ago, there were, and there had been for many years, boats mooring in the swim area. And when we were there looking at how big a swim area we would make, there were kids swimming within 10 feet of outboard motors starting up and taking off. And so a year and a half ago, the town notified 3 people with moorings in the swim area that they had to move them, and they did. I actually helped move a couple of them. So that hopefully answers that question, but we did have some issues around that. One of the boats was owned by somebody who didn't even live in Winthrop, didn't even live in Maine. He lived in Massachusetts and had a girlfriend in Maine, but that was a issue. The other one was on Cobussy, where I live. We do have a issue with crowding in our cove by the YMCA camp, and comes down to a 12-foot wide right-of-way and multiple people claiming access and ownership. And there are 3 camps, one either side of me, and there are 7 or 8 moorings in a pretty short distance. And we've had issues with people's moorings being too close to others and not being able to use their moorings when things like storms come up. And I'm also president of the Road Association, so I hear this from some of the people who are members of our road. I'm glad you broadened the survey out to not just residents, because we have 16 members on our road, and half are year-round homes and half are summer cottages, and people from Maryland to New York own the cottages, and they have a concern as well. And so I'm glad you broadened that survey. I guess the last thing is the prior ordinance never really addressed the right of way issue. And if 10 people have a right of way that's 10 feet wide, who gets priority? How do you handle that? How do you manage that? And I think there ought to be some sort of a minimum or minimum separation distance, and that was never really addressed in the prior ordinance either. You know, whether it's 50 feet or 100 feet, I don't think moorings ought to be any closer than that to each other. They're going to be a navigational hazard issue. There's going to be a safety issue. There's going to be just a general congestion issue. So that was all I wanted to say, but thank you.
Well, thanks for attending and weighing in. So, Dwight, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion, all in favor? You can use adjourn.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Lynn. Happy birthday.